Okay, my name is Kevin Barfield. I'm a solution architect with Docker, and I'm going to be talking about how Telepresence ties into Docker Desktop, making it even easier to use. So there is a Telepresence extension for Docker Desktop, and I'm going to be showing usage of that in a couple of different ways. So what I'm going to do is do a very simple demo first to just show you kind of how this works, and then go through the architecture in a little bit more detail, talk about the use cases a little bit more, and then do a scenario or a demo that hopefully is a little more reflective of how somebody would actually use it in the real world. Okay, so this is my order tracking application. I've got an Apache service, customer service, order service, and catalog service. This is a sample app. In the real world, there would be data stores behind each one of these things. And that's the point that Mohammed was bringing up, is that with these Kubernetes environments, with all these different services and data services and so on, it's very difficult with writing code, maybe doing a few unit tests, but after that, they've got to push it out to another environment to actually see how it works with the other services. And that's problematic because it means the time between when they actually finish coding and when they see if this is actually working or not properly increases. So you want that inner loop for developers of the code build test to be as small as you possibly can, so they can iterate as fast as they can. And so by requiring them to push to another environment and having to wait 10, 15 minutes to do that, you're making it longer and making it more difficult for people, slowing down your innovation. Okay, so this is my environment. If I pop over Visual Studio and I do Control All, we see my environment here running in EKS. So you can see I set this up earlier today. It's out there running. You can see my deployments here. Everything's good. So let's go look at this wonderful app that I've deployed out. Ta-da! This is my beautiful app. As you can see, it's very detailed, kind of basic. So let's see if we can't fix that. So let's go back over to Visual Studio. Let's go to my index.html file. Let's throw in a logo. And I don't know if you all noticed, there were actually 2 catalog links. I'm not sure why we need 2 catalog links. Let's actually take one of these and make it search catalog. And we're going to save that. And we're going to build it. So I built it. Now I need to push it out to my Kubernetes environment, wait 15 minutes, and then I'll be able to see if my change is actually good. Or I can go over here. You can see there are no containers running at the moment. I can go to my Telepresence extension on Docker Desktop. Log me in here. All right, so we're going to see the kube context for my environment here. We can install Telepresence. This would be what you would need to do the first time you use Telepresence with it. This is the same as the command lines that Mohammed was showing earlier. I already did that earlier because I was testing my demo. And so I'm just simply going to connect instead. It's going to show the default namespace because I deployed all my stuff to defaults. So here are all my services that it pulled back from that kube context. I'm going to tell it to intercept the Apache. Now it's going to pop up a dialog. It knows the port because it pulled it from the kube config. This is simply a list of the images that are available on my machine. I selected this one earlier, so that's why I selected that. And it's showing the same port down here. So now we're going to create an intercept for that. So it is now actually going out and connecting, doing the intercept. And so now it says the intercept is running. Okay, so the intercept is running using HTTP. And it's using HTTP headers. So I'm going to copy the header. I'm going to go back over to my environment. I have mod header here on my Chrome instance. So I'm going to drop that header in. here. This. That, here. And now I'm going to refresh my page. So now my changes are in here. But wait, Kevin, what about everybody else who's using this environment? What's happening with them? Well, let's go back over here. Uncheck it. And refresh. Nothing's changed for anybody else. So everybody else using this environment is still doing things just the way they were before with no impact. Whereas I, or anybody else who has this header, is getting the new experience and is able to go through and use the rest of the environment as if the whole environment was running locally for me. Okay? So let's now take a step back. So I've shown you what this can do. Let's take a step back and talk about what actually just happened. So let's go back over here, and throw this up, and let's talk through it now. So we have Kubernetes environment. We have an ingress and a load balancing. That is going to go to a pod, right? So far, so good. What we're doing here is a couple of things. First off, when we do a connect the first time to a Kubernetes environment, we are installing a traffic manager into that environment. That traffic manager is doing a couple different things. It's helping to get traffic redirected to the machine, and it's also connecting to the Ambassador Cloud if you want to use their preview URLs. That is not a hard requirement to connect to Ambassador Cloud, but it is the default behavior if you're using the plugin extension to me. So the traffic manager is the first component that's getting installed. The second component is there's a sidecar that's getting installed onto the pod that you're actually intercepting. This is where the redirection is actually happening. So the call's coming to it, hits the sidecar, pushes out to the traffic manager, and then over to your machine. Questions about any of this? Yes?
I might have missed it because I missed the first few minutes. So you have to deploy this on the cluster that the application is running on?
Yes. So the idea is that you've got a remote cluster that you want to connect to.
Will be on deploy.
And then you're installing the traffic manager. And then once you're actually intercepting, you're installing the sidecar. Yeah.
What traffic is getting sent to the Ambassador Cloud? I didn't catch that.
So there's a couple things that are going on there. First off, let me pop back over here. Let's see. One. There we go. So if you look right down here, there's this preview URL. Okay. So this preview URL is then connecting to the Ambassador Cloud, and then from there going down to your cluster. So this is a way for you to actually be able to see the change without having to implement HTTP headers. Okay, so that's what that connection is doing there. It's not sending your data to Ambassador Cloud. It's actually just providing the ability to connect from there into your cluster. And it is collecting like statistics, but it's not sending like your company's data or that kind of thing. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I did. I had a follow-up too. Can you pick and choose what you want Telepresence to actually connect to and read through the headers for, or is it just anything that's on that cluster is going to change it?
I'm sorry, I didn't follow your question.
So clusters have multiple applications, everything and all that.
Right.
When Telepresence is installed, and it's going to read everything, or can you say, okay, I only want to read X, Y, Z? And
yeah, so when you're installing Telepresence in a cluster, it's within a namespace. So within that namespace, it's going to be in there, and then you can actually connect to different workloads in there and either tell it, I want to do a global intercept, which means all the traffic to that service gets redirected to your machine, or do a personal intercept, which is having the headers and saying only the traffic that has this header gets redirected to my machine.
And is namespace specific, or can you read services from other namespaces?
You can do from other namespaces as well. I'm going to show a more advanced example of that kind of thing in just a minute.
Okay.
Yes.
Other than the container and the network security? Is there any security on the telepresence itself to say, hey, no, this does not happen here, this does happen here?
Yes, there is RBAC available on it. So if you want to do role-based access control, you can do that with this. I'm not showing any of that with the basic functionality here. But yes, those things are available. And thank you, you reminded me something I meant to show earlier. So we saw earlier there were no containers running. Now we see there's 2 containers running. There is the telepresence service itself running in a container. So there it is. And then there is this TP Apache, which is my image that's running locally. So this is, going back to your question from earlier, this is a container just like any other. It's running on this machine, traffic's being directed to it. I can go and inspect it. I can go do anything I want to with it because it's running locally on my machine.
Scaled up, it would probably have no effect. You wouldn't scale.
Yeah, no, this is not intended to be a load type thing. It's intended to be a functional test type thing where you can get better feedback faster. Any other questions? Yeah.
I might miss that. So how do you how do you determine who has access to the telepresence instance that you have deployed on the cluster? So
So you can have multiple people doing multiple intercepts on multiple services at the same time. And I'm going to get into that more in just a minute. Now, there's 2 aspects to that. There is a security aspect, which is where the role-based access control, that kind of thing, about who can do what. And nobody's asked this yet, but usually every time I talk about this, somebody starts asking, hey, can we do telepresence to production? And I'm like, yes, technically you can. No, I don't recommend you do that. But the role-based access control would be, you have access to this, you have access to that, that kind of thing. The other aspect of this is still a shared environment you're connected to. So yes, you can have multiple people connecting to it and not interfering with each other. But if there are shared things in that environment, like data, for instance, then you've got to still be aware of who's doing what. So there's still got to be communication between the people doing intercepts in that same environment, such that they don't step on each other.
So there's nothing to lock, I'm working on this, I'm doing this now. There's nothing to lock you out to have you come in and completely overwrite whatever I'm doing.
Nothing that is outside of the role-based access control. So if 2 people have access to it, then yes, they could both go in and they could both intercept the same service and they could do it without stepping on each other. But there's still the possibility of person A deciding to delete a bunch of records that person B needed
That's what I'm
for
saying.
stuff. Yeah,
So there's no lockout.
there's no lockout, no.
I mean, in that case, there's no lockout anyways when you deploy it either.
Correct.
So,
Yeah, when you're deploying it, you're taking the environment down.
You're not.
Yeah.
But I did follow with the role base. Are you saying then, so if I have 10 developers, and I only want those 10 developers to have access to that, then I create the role based access on the clusters deployed and then they connect to that base off of whatever user credential that's tied to that role base.
To the cluster level, to the namespace level.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So now, I guess,
So do the other services also recognize the presence of this,
I'm sorry.
of your environment or your container? Do the other services also recognize the presence of, or this is only, because you said with the header,
Yeah.
so whatever is coming externally is getting to your container.
So,
But is the other services, like there were some other containers, right?
yeah,
In that environment, are they also recognizing you as the legitimate one?
yeah. So give me a minute, and I'm going to run through another example. Hopefully, we'll show what you're asking. Okay. So let me hop back over here, and then I'm going to stop the intercept I'm doing. You can tell here it's connected. So I'm going to stop all my intercepts. Now, so what I've shown so far is a very simple example. I mean, it's simple to the point that you're like, hey, why would you even use intercepts? That's such an HTML range. And that's fine. But let's go and talk about a better example. So often when you're actually modifying code, you're not doing a service, you're doing a group of services that are interrelated to each other. So in this case, actually I put that in the wrong box. Sorry. Imagine this box is around orders and catalog. So imagine the orders and catalog being two services that are often modified together because they rely on each other. Okay, and you have somebody who's working on both those services and making changes to both those services and want to see those changes to both those services at the same time. Okay, so that's the scenario we're going to go through here. Move my box down because I feel bad. There we go. Okay. All right. So now let's go back over. Let's go back over to our app. All right. Here we are in our app. We can see our customers here. We got MobiDoc and MollyDoc as our customers. Now let's go look at our catalog. So our catalog here, and it's all
Wide variety,
Huh?
wide variety.
Yes, there is. You can notice here that our prices aren't really formatted in a way that indicates their prices. It's formatted like a number. So, and then if we go back here and we add in an order, and Moby here is quite retro, so he's going to get 3 iPods. We can see here the price again is not really the way we want. So we can imagine there being a JIRA ticket saying, hey, make these numbers look like actual currency. So now let's go back over here and get out of the Apache service, come down to catalog, walk through a whole bunch of directories because it's Java. Right. Here we are, item list. All right, so yeah, I put this change in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a change to both the catalog app and the orders app to change it from being just regular, and I've already put the change in here, but to add this numbers format currency on this. So that's going to make it a currency type format. And I've already done it for orders. I forgot to take it out from catalog. So now I'm going to do Docker build this. Now, while we're doing that, let's go look at this. So far, we've talked about 2 different ways of doing intercepts. CLI is what Mohammed talked about. So you can go in there and type in the command. The UI is what I've shown so far with the extension. The third way of doing it is the way that actually I think most people should be doing it if they're doing it in a serious way, which is, to do it in a YAML format. So now your configuration for Telepresence is code and can be maintained like code, which is the right way of doing things. So in this case, I've got the context, I've got the namespace, and you notice namespaces, so you can do multiple namespaces, and then you can start defining which workloads and what intercepts you want to do on each workload. So you can define in here as many as you want. You can see that the ports are being defined, and then this is the intercept, and then the handlers being defined here. And then there's the order intercept and its handlers being defined. And if we scroll down further, now we actually see the handlers for it, which is defining locally what port and what image is going to be used for each one of these. Okay, so this is the way you can handle doing much more complex intercepts and being able to do multiple services simultaneously across multiple namespaces if you wanted to, and be able to do it in such a way that you're not having to use a UI or having a fat finger a CLI to type all this in. Everybody with me? Yes.
As far as deploying this, are you deploying this with the telepresence command line, or are you deploying this with kubectl to push it out to the cluster?
The telepresence command, or telepresence API is what's doing. I'm using the UI to do that. You can also do it through the telepresence CLI. That's doing it. And it's interacting with kube control behind the scenes.
So let me test my knowledge here. So the telepresence command, you would feed that file as an argument and say, go to this, and it knows based on probably kubectl which cluster to talk to.
Well, it knows what cluster. Because I told it right there.
Oh, yeah, that's CRN. Oh, sweet.
Yeah, it's all defined right there. Now, here's the other aspect of this that's very positive, is that I, as a senior developer or architect on a project, can go write this up and I can go check it in. And then I can give it to junior developer and say, go run this using this command. And they have to know exactly this much about Kubernetes to make that work. So you don't have to have every single developer be a kube expert to make this work. They can actually interact with these environments and not have to understand all the underlying plumbing that's going on. Okay, so let's go make this work. So I'm here on the Telepresence extension again. I'm going to click upload the intercept specification. I'm going to click that YAML file. I'm going to click open. It is going to connect to the environment. It is going to set up both the intercepts for me. It's going to pop up a couple of warning messages from the containers themselves, because the containers show warning messages when they start up. They're going to pop them up here on the screen so you can see them. And then it's going to give me the ability to do it. So here's my warning messages. And now if I scroll down, I see both intercepts running. And I see the request header is now what I specified in the YAML file. So now if I copy that and I pop over here, and I pop it in here. Right, and I go home, reload that. See, my change went away from the Apache because I stopped that intercept. So now if I go over to the catalog, things are looking better. So I've got that. Now let's go over to order. Hey, wait a minute, where'd my order go? Well, remember, there's no databases for this. This is a sample application. So because I've started up a new container, the only data that's there is what started up with it, and it had no orders to start with. So now let's put another order in. Bobby still likes iPods. This time he wants 5 of them. We see the number formatted there as well. So now if we pop back over to Docker Desktop and go look at what we have running, again, we see the telepresence service running as a container, and we see the catalog and order services running as well. And again, if you don't have that HTTP header, you're continuing life as usual. Or if you're a different developer, you could have your own header, different header, and intercept those same services and go and do your own different work, or intercept other services in that same namespace or other namespaces. Questions? Yes.
Is there a thought of having an easier way, or maybe like a forwarding instead of constantly copying the headers? Maybe just having like a link that you put the headers in there for you, or?
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple ways of doing that. So in this case, you know, in most cases, if you're a developer doing this work on a regular basis, you're going to have your header that you're going to have in your file that you're going to define.
Okay.
And then it's just going to be in there. It's just bad whether you turn it on or off, or just leave it on all the time if that's what you're going to be
So
doing.
I could define the header and then I could
Exactly.
just refresh every time and don't
Yes.
have to worry about copying.
Yes, that was, I'm sorry I didn't show it better in there, but yes, the header is actually defined in that YAML.
Oh, okay. Anybody that has that header will see that same page. So you can share, it's like, hey, check this out.
Correct. Yep.
So look the header and everything.
Usually when I'm doing something like this over Zoom, I usually put the the URL in there and then people can try it and that kind of thing. But yeah, since nobody has a laptop except for you, you know, that it's a little, yes. Any other questions? Yes.
Trying to think out phrases, give me a second.
Okay.
In the interception, pulling it to the local laptop,
Yep.
what kind of security is there to make sure it doesn't stay on the laptop?
What do you mean stay on the laptop?
It's being downloaded to the laptop, or is it just as a window onto the Kubernetes cluster?
So let me go back to the architecture and we'll talk about it. Okay, so what's happening is the request is coming in, it's going to the sidecar, and it's going to the laptop to be executed. At that point, it is code being executed on that laptop in a container.
Okay,
There's
so,
no guarantees whatsoever that it's going to complete execution or execute correctly or anything else at that point. It's executing on that laptop.
no, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking if, okay, I'm going, worst case scenario, you got a contractor. He's doing some coding for you. He's using that. You've discovered that he's not the best contractor in the world. You want to get rid of him. What's to make sure that when he leaves that laptop, that your code isn't still on that laptop somewhere?
So that's a different question. So if you're saying, hey, I want to make sure that individual developers don't have source code access to be able to copy it and take it with you, that's outside the purview of what Telepresence is doing.
Okay, so the source code would still be on the laptop is what you're saying.
So if you're using a remote source code tool, then that source code is in that remote source code tool. If you're allowing that developer to run a container on their laptop, then that container has that code within it, regardless of whether Telepresence is there or not. So if you're saying, hey, I'm not going to allow the developer to have source code and I'm not going to allow them to run containers locally, then Telepresence isn't going to be an option.
Also, even thing on the other aspect of that is because you're using the RBAC, you just change get rid of the developer's access with RBAC and they no longer could do the routing or anything else either.
Right, so the concern was, what if that person steals the source code and runs away with it? You know, there are organizations that basically don't want the developers to have any access to the source code outside of what's on the screen and have no ability to copy it out.
Like the laptop.
Any other questions? Yes.
Ambassador tied to the Kubernetes ambassador. And is this all kind of built on Envoy proxy?
Built on what?
Is it built on Envoy proxy as far as the mechanism that they use to do all the traffic?
It is a sidecar. I believe it's built on Envoy. I'll have to double check on that for you.
So the two of your containers are talking to each other without going through the management, or
Okay.
they are. Okay.
So in this case, I have two different containers running on my machine, but there's nothing that the Telepresence is going to understand about how those two are connected to each other. So when I connect and go through and go to catalog, it's going to go to my machine, execute catalog, and come back. If I then immediately go to order, it's going to go back and execute on my machine and come back again.
And it's also forwarding the headers.
I'm sorry?
It's also forwarding the headers.
Yeah, so it's using the header for both those services. So I'm using the same header for both of them.
Yeah, good. And that's why you need to have that particular YAML file so that they share that.
Yes, or I can make them separate. I can actually have them both running and have two separate headers if I want to do one or the other at different points.
So if you're trying to see which way of coding it is going to be a little more efficient, you can have the two of them side by side and watch them.
Good, good. Yes.
If you had a service to service call, would you be able to implement a mechanism to also upgrade those services and maintain the existing service? So we've got a lot of services that kind of hairpin back and talk to, so it's not a web page calling, it's actually the service calling another service, and it would not have the header because it's just going to call services or a way to have it inject that.
So Telepresence works best with HTTP header or HTTP request, I should say. There are 2 or 3 ways of doing that. So there, for instance, there's a tracer library that you can use if you don't want to use pure HTTP headers. There are also options for TCP and UDP, but those options are not nearly as built out. So I'm not going to really recommend those at this point.
Follow-up question. HTTPS, is that supported?
Yes.
Security, okay.
Yes. Anyone else? All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and hopefully the demonstration's been useful. Already ran off with all the prizes. I'm sorry, you guys were too slow. He just took off with everything.
He said he was going to. I mean, it's not a surprise.
To the